I am the principal partner and founding partner of Reuben, Mburu and Associates Advocates. In today's webinar, we're going to discuss critical compliance checks for startups. This is a pretty broad topic. So in terms of time management and being aware that a lot of questions are going to arise out of this presentation, we're going to have the first 30 minutes discussing and going through this presentation. Then the last few minutes, we're going to have questions and answers session. So of course, ideally what we would be discussing on the onset of this presentation is that we're going to discuss business registration, taxation, employment, data protection, anti-money laundering and financial reporting, and some sector-specific obligations. Reason, when I put out the Google form, I did find out that many of the questions that arose were coming out of these areas. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is the selection of what business vehicle you would prefer for your entity. Then we're going to discuss some of the registration procedures for your vehicles. Then we're going to discuss the taxation obligations. Then we're going to discuss employment and the various ways on which you can engage your employees or your contractors. Then we're going to discuss the recent anti-money laundering regulations and the reporting requirements. We're then going to discuss data protection and sector-specific regulations. And the two sectors that we're going to address are the financial sector and the health sector, and the startup-specific instruments that are pretty much relevant for startup businesses and investments at that stage. Now, in choosing the business vehicle that you want to undertake, we need to understand what structure would you prefer for the vehicle that you would want to have and run your business. The legal structure that you choose will determine how you engage with other businesses, how you engage with other regulators, and how you discuss liability, how tax is done, how your fundraising and your capacity is built, and even the requirements that you have, and even the potentials for exit. Now, everybody wants to start a company. Usually, a company is usually a separate legal entity, and the reason why many businesses decide to take up and decide to use companies as the business entity is because companies have a separate legal personality. You can restrict share transfer, you can fundraise using companies, and you can get other investments, venture capitalists, and you can even decide to become publicly listed and do an IPO. The benefits of an IPO is the advantages are the kind of financial raising that you can do. Now, how do you register a company, and what are the obligations that are there? So you register a company through the business registration services, and what you need are your proposed name, your articles of association, your memorandum of association, your details for your directors, your registered office address, and your statement of nominal capital. Now, this will cost you 10,050 shillings. These are the statutory fees. When you engage a lawyer for this process, the advocate's remuneration order usually bills it for around 40,000. And with that, you can be able to register your company. Now, with a company, there are certain obligations that you have. You need to file annual taxes, you maintain your register of members, your directors change, and your AGMs and your financials, and you need to comply with this. Now, there's risks that arise for non-compliance with these obligations, is that you can have penalties and you can get your company being struck off the registrar and dissolving it. Then you also have the risk of the lifting of the corporate veil or the piercing of the corporate veil. What does this mean? This means that as a company, the liability stops being protected from the company, but then it goes into the directors. Now, of course, for various startups and various businesses, you would want to engage your lawyer in your memorandums and articles of associations and on your shareholder agreements immediately you decide to register your company. A shareholder agreement will address some of the obligations that the directors have between each other, and it will also address some of the disputes that might arise and even the investments that they have. Now, another interesting business vehicle that you may decide to undertake and do is partnership. And partnerships, you can either have a general partnership or a limited liability partnership. Now, a general partnership occurs where you want to still be liable, while a limited liability partnership gives you the protections that generally are accorded to companies. The process of registration of a partnership is also similarly through the BRS, and an LLP will give you protection because it is a separate instrument, it can hold property, but a general partnership is similarly to a sole proprietorship where each individual has liability to their potential investment that they undertook and as per the partnership deed. Now, the risks with partnerships are, of course, when it's a general partnership, you're liable as a partner. But when it is a limited liability partnership, the liability is to the partnership. The limited liability partnership can hold property, but the general partnership property can only be held by individuals. So when to engage a lawyer is when you want to generate the partnership deed and also regarding the registration processes of the same. Now, a sole proprietorship, this is now the most simple and most straightforward business form. This is where people, in simple terms or lay terms, call it registration of a business. Now, a business name rather. Now, this is usually where there is no separation between the individual and the business. So you hold the property in your name, the taxes are in your name, the KRA PIN is the same as your own, and you register the business through the BRS portal at the fee of 950. This is pretty straightforward, and unfortunately, you cannot raise equity, you cannot issue shares, and you cannot admit partners, but you can only have employees, and you cannot really protect yourself from the business. Now, here, when a business is sued, for example, you're personally liable for the implications of the suit that occurs. And for example, if you have liability for debts, you can only collect debts in your name. This is very different from the various other forms of business vehicles, such as again the companies and the LLPs. Now we also have trusts, societies, and civil society organizations. These are different vehicles. Now for trust, this is where you want to do the family planning, religious purposes, or philanthropy, or you just want to hold assets. This is also governed. This is also governed by the government of Kenya, and you would need to undertake the registration of a trust deed at the Ministry of Lands, and then you can be able to transfer properties either to be held by the trust or be held by the trustees. But usually, you don't do commercialization using trust. Societies, these are prohibited from profit making. Most religious organizations are registered as societies, clubs, and associations. Then we also have the CSOs. These are formally called the NGOs. So these ones usually do a lot of development advocacy and humanitarian works. They can get donor funding, and they're also regulated, and they have various tax exemptions that are available. So when choosing your business vehicle, you need to ask yourself, what is it am I doing with this vehicle? Is it a law firm? For example, for law firms, you can only register them as a sole proprietorship or a partnership. And this is the reason for this is because lawyers are prohibited from sharing profits with other business operators or with non-lawyers, as it were. So you need to ask yourself, what is the objective? Do I want to raise funds? Do I want to have liability onto me, or do you want to have liability onto somebody else? Do I want to protect myself, and what risks do I want to have? So with that knowledge, you then decide, I'm going to register a society, I'm going to register a CSO, I'm going to register a company, or I'm going to register a business name, which is a sole proprietorship. Now, the registration procedures are very simple and very straightforward. For example, if you want to register a sole proprietorship, you really don't need to engage a lawyer. You can just go into the BRS and do a name search and reserve the account. And because you see, then your liabilities to yourself. So you just want to conduct a business. It's very simple and straightforward and costs you 950. But if you want to do a company, then you might need a lawyer because you want to understand what are these memorandums and articles of association. What about my partners? How do I do fundraising? Do I want to do investments with angel investors? Do I want to have vesting schedule for shareholding? Do I want to have shareholding for my employees? So for registration, if it's a sole proprietorship, really you don't need much in engaging a lawyer. But when you want to register a company, some of those questions are very intricate and they're very important to ask yourself. Then you also need to figure out things like taxation, because you have the Kenya Revenue Authority PIN. For a sole proprietor, the PIN is the same and it's similar, but for the other business vehicles, the PIN is usually separate because the liability is different. Now, these are some of the various charges and the governing bodies in terms of regarding registration when you want to undertake registration for the same. Now, of course, operating business without registration is a criminal offense. Where you have contracts with a business that has not been registered, the contract may not be enforceable. So even in your interactions and when you're buying or you're selling, or when you want to undertake a particular business operation with another business or a partnership with another business, make sure that one, that business is registered, because you cannot be able to enforce a contract with a business that has not been registered. Then you also need to have a bank account. You cannot have a business bank account or M-Pesa pay bill or tender for contracts without registration. Now, as I was telling you earlier, if you're a sole proprietor, you can self-register. But for companies, especially when you have more than one founder, it's important to engage a lawyer so that you can even discuss the shareholding, the investor rights, and the various aspects of it all. On to taxation. Now, taxation is everybody knows what taxation is. You have to give to Caesar what is owed to Caesar. On the onset, there are various taxes that you need to understand as a business owner. You need to understand pay as you earn. This is where you have employees and you need to pay or rather remit the various payments that and earnings that they have. It's basically a withholding mechanism, and you take the taxes at source and then you deduct. And usually the beauty with pay as you earn is that it can act as a final tax for the employee, because of the drawing of the salary, unless the employee has a different income. You usually file this by the 9th of the coming month, and you usually issue your employees a P9 form, but you file using a P10 form. Then for you to do this, it is important to engage a lawyer and an accountant, but more importantly, a lawyer. Reason being the tax code constantly changes, and you also want to understand some of the aspects of it all. Now, usually the pay as you earn has reliefs and allowances, and it's important to put them correctly in your calculations in the payroll and even the benefits that you issue. Then there's usually a penalty of 25% of the tax as an employer and 1% interest per month. And the directors can be held personally liable where you have a company. This is going to be very important to understand, even when we discuss the various types of employees, where you can have various different cadre of employees. You can have employees and consultants and the various ways of distributing the taxes that are there to them. But usually KRA has a very meticulous eye to ensure that the remittances that you conduct in pay as you earn are conducted every other month. Now we also have value-added tax. This is usually levied at 16% of the standard rate of taxable goods and income. Everybody does pay value-added tax every single time you buy or sell a product. You usually pay VAT. But when you turnover, your annual turnover has not exceeded 5 million per year, you don't have to pay VAT. But unfortunately, you still act as a tax agent, where you issue invoices, you have to remit to the Kenya Revenue Authority. You have to remit to them the VAT. When you issue the invoice, you have to charge, and you act as a tax agent. So how do you do this? You apply for VAT registration on iTax, and then using the e-TINs, you issue the invoice, and then you file on the 20th of every month. But then now the law says registration is not mandatory if your turnover is not 5 million per year. And the 2021 Act also talks about turnover tax, whereby you pay 1% of your gross turnover if you do not pay this VAT. Um, then of course we have withholding tax. This is not usually a final tax. Withholding tax applies especially to professional fees and management fees, whereby you withhold 5%, because generally income tax is usually at 30%, but you as the employer of a consultant or the issue of professional fees, you withhold 5% of that tax, and when they remit, they're able to balance it out and ensure that the income, the 30% income tax that is usually payable, they can justify and file and show the expenses and the various deductions. Now, many people don't usually withhold these taxes, but it's important to withhold, and you issue your consultants with a withholding certificate. Then we used to have a DST, the Digital Services Tax, in 2021, but this was replaced or absorbed by the Significant Economic Presence Tax. These are taxes on digital services. So ideally, what the SEPT tax is applying is to most of these digital companies such as Meta and Facebook and TikTok, and the payments that they usually issue to digital creators. Now we also have excise duty. Excise duty is considered as sin tax. Quote unquote, sin tax is more or less to prohibit or to limit the usage of a particular thing, such as beer, spirits, tobacco, imports. But now, unfortunately, because our regulations or our laws are very prohibitive, we have excise duty on imports and on exports. These are import duties and custom duties, but they have a various different rates of application. What you look at is the Excise Duty Act, and to get compliance for the same. Now, we also have to discuss employment by virtue of the fact that startup founders and business operations require you to have employees, or rather than they need employees to function. So regarding employees, we have two ways on which you can engage people within your employ. You can have employees, and you can have contractors. So employees are governed by the Employment Act, and you have employment contracts for them, where you're in charge of their hours, you're in charge of their place of work, their remuneration, their benefits. These are the ones that you need to pay as you earn for, and then you also need to have a job description, the leave entitlements, the notice period, the 21-day leave, and they have rights. So they have 21 days leave per annum, they have sick days, they have maternity leave, they have paternity leave, and they need to have overtime pay. And there are various contributions for employees, where you have an SSF, and in the older regime we had the 200, but now it's tiered, and we also have various levies for the same. You need to, as an employer, you need to ask yourself, how am I engaging my employees? How do I need them to handle my property, my intellectual property, the confidentiality? How will I handle probation, and even regarding regarding the process of removal of members part of your team. It's very important to review, and ask yourself the people I'm engaging. This is the manner in which I want to engage them. These are the remittances and the various aspects that I want to do. Now, we have the disciplinary processes at the time of leaving. So as an employer, you need to know that you just do not kick people out of your company. Otherwise, you're going to be charged in court, the Employment and Labor Relations Court. And unfortunately, they usually favor employees a lot, maybe fortunately, depending on who you are. So you need to do a proper disciplinary process. They have a right to be heard. Then they have a timeline for termination. Then you also have aspects of summary dismissal where you can remove somebody summarily. This is because of gross misconduct, breach of duty, neglect, even dishonesty. But you need to have these grounds well tested, and you also need to ensure that that your employee has a right to be heard. Now, yes, I have. Right, I thought it was a hand raised. Right. Then we also have the independent contractor who I was talking about. Now, an independent contractor is the individual you do not control their time and how they integrated into the business. So when you go to court and say that you're an independent contractor, or you want to talk to the taxman to justify why you're not paying PAYE and why you have people employed as independent contractors, you need to show them that you do not control their work, you do not control their hours, you do not control how they deliver the results, but regardless of the contract, because the contract that you have, the contract that you have will determine the nature of that. But regardless of however the contract is, the courts usually have a test. So does this person? Do you need to control this person's hours? Do you control how much time they take into the business? Are they integrated into the business? And also, who bears the risk of the financial outcome of the work? Does the employee use their own tools or your own tools? So these are some of the aspects that you need to think about when you're engaging people. Now, even when you're hiring people, especially startups, they hire a lot of developers as contractors to avoid PAYE and employment law. But the challenge is that if you do not structure your system or the way that you allocate the work in a proper way, you may be forced by KRA to calculate back PAYE and various taxes and even NHIF and NSSF. Now, we have anti-money laundering regulations. The reason why this was very critical is because we had a lot of, through the Google form, we had a lot of requests for us to address this. Now, anti-money laundering regulations require reporting, financial reporting, especially where some of your businesses or your startups are involved with financial systems. They're involved in real estate and even for law firms. Now, because of the illegality of money laundering, you need to understand and know your customer. You need to do your due diligence and enhanced due diligence where various transactions are occurring within your organization. Now, we have various transactions that are critical. As you're aware, when you do a transaction of $1 million, most of the banks usually raise flags and ask for you to report and explain where that money has been made and what's the source of your income. Of course, this is usually a bit challenging and problematic, especially for lawyers and for real estate companies, but it is a requirement, and you also need to maintain the records for at least 7 years. So for the lawyers, you need to report through the LSK framework, and for real estate owners, you also need to report, because this is where most of the money laundering has been occurring. Remember the Minnesota fraud allegations that have been occurring, and usually, more often than not, you usually find emails that are sent to you by the process of anti-money laundering divisions, where they tell you that if you hold accounts for various people, you need to freeze the accounts and report that you have various accounts for the same. And we also have now the BRS beneficial ownership reporting matters. Now, the penalties for this can fall anywhere between 5 million and 20 million, and Kenya has been a haven for these crimes. So it is very important for you as a startup founder within the real estate sector, within the legal space, and within the financial sector to be aware and to know where your clients or the clients that are high risk, and address and figure out if your client is actually laundering money and how to protect yourself. We also have data protection. This is a key area of interest, and the 2019 Data Protection Act governs this collection, use, storage, and transfer of personal data in Kenya. Now, most, if not all, businesses handle personal information of Kenyans. Now, where you have the names, the emails, the identifiable data, the phone numbers, when you process some of this data, you need to be registered as a data processor or a data controller within the framework that is provided for within the Data Protection Office. This is a fairly straightforward process, and the statutory charges for registration as a data controller and as a data processor, for the lowest band, it's usually 4,000. So if your annual turnover is less than 5 million, it's usually 4,000 a year, and it's a pretty straightforward process. There are various companies that mandatorily you must register, even beyond. Some of them are voluntary, but some of them are mandatory. So if your startup is within the financial sector, if you're in the healthcare sector, if you're in the real estate sector, some of those startups you have to register and ensure that you are registered to process and to control personal data, and you need to collect data within a lawful basis, have a privacy protection policy, have a way of data minimization, and process the data within the rights of the people or the data subjects that you're collecting the data from. And in case of breaches of data, notify the ODPC office within 72 hours. So there are principles of data collection. It must be collected lawfully, fairly, in a specified and explicit purpose, and it should be relevant, not excessive, and explicit and adequate and accurate, and kept up to date, and not for longer than necessary. And even when there is international data transfer, it's important to ensure that the country that you're transferring data to has appropriate data protection standards, and you need to analyze also where servers are located, especially for cloud-based infrastructure. Now, even when you're building, ensure you incorporate privacy by design, and have audits for your privacy and your data system. Even when you have the CRMs, the customer relationship management tools that you have, such as Odoo, your analytic tools, ensure that you go through their privacy policies, ensure that they do not share the personal data that you're collecting with third parties, and you will be safe and you'll be able to be protected. Now, the reality is the ODPC has been constantly every now and then charging people with these penalties, 500,000, 250,000, over and over and over again over the last few years. And yesterday, no, rather the day before yesterday, I was in an ODPC seminar where they said that they're going to start charging higher for individuals and companies that have been reported to be violating people's data and not complying. And it's very important for you to look into this. Now, of course, there are various sector-specific regulations that you need to look into, and I will constantly encourage you to be very curious and very intentional within the various fields that you're in. Now, within the fintech sector, we have the National Payment Systems Act, the CBK Act, the Banking Act. There are various licenses that you need to have. For example, the Payment Service Provider License, the PSP license. This is very, very critical. It's governed by the National Payment System Act, and the PSP license it's pretty expensive. I think the lowest band for it is around 20 million. So when you're starting a startup, you need to figure out whether you can be able to afford some of these licenses, because if you do not get these licenses, the downside is pretty high, because you can simply be sued for the same, and the CBK can decide to shut down your business. So your fundraising as a startup founder within the fintech space needs to be forward-looking, look at the requirements for the licenses within your space, for your wallets, and then decide whether you really want to pursue that aspect. Even digital lenders, a lot of digital lenders had been taking individuals to court for non-compliance and failure to pay, to paying for the debts that they had collected, and the court used to tell them, "Are you licensed?" And once the court realizes that the service provider or the credit provider is not licensed, they kick them out. Now, ideally, there are various requirements for these licenses, but I won't go and delve way deep into this. Reason is this is just an introductory webinar to just have a high level overview on some of these compliance issues, and we will probably go further into depth into these specific aspects. We just wanted to have a feel and an understanding, and to spark curiosity within the compliance space in these various sectors. We also have the health sector. Now, the health sector, you need to be licensed by the ODPC because of the critical health data. Then we also have the Pharmacy and Poisons Board, and the KPMDC, and the various aspects that you need to be regulated by the union. And of course, digital medicine, telemedicine. We have the digital health highway that has costed the country a few billions. You need to be very intentional about the field that you're in. Look at the various opportunities for licensing that are there, and the risk that is present for non-compliance. Now, regarding startups, we have things that you need to look at as a startup founder, because once you begin your business, you want to ensure that your relationships with your partners, your founders, your investors, and your equity structure is set up from the word go. You need to figure out things like NDAs with your developers, because you do not want to lose some of your intellectual property. You do not want to lose some of your code base and things of that sort. Then you need to, of course, talk to a lawyer so that you understand some of the patterns and the things that you would want to be protected, because there are things that are very proprietary. Even your business systems, your plans, your technology, your financials, your trade secrets, some of these things are not to be shared just haphazard, to be out there with everybody. And again, you want your NDA to be clear cut, even with your investors. There are things that you also want to discuss, such as term sheets, and term sheets are potential documents for investments. When you want an investor to come in, how they are going to invest, their valuations, the equity, whether there's going to be a vesting schedule for your shares and their shares, and the aspects of board control. You do not want to be a founder who's losing their startup once they start, or once they start making sales or revenue. How rights are distributed within the system, who has the rights, and even how the vesting structure will occur for shares. This is very important, because sometimes you want, as a startup founder, you want your investor to have vesting aspects of the shareholding. Once that the shares vest as they issue, they don't get into your CR12 immediately, but they are going to give you money in a more or less a very slow system, in a very slow structure. You want to have a term sheet that is clear cut as a founder, and even an investor usually looks at and ensures that their term sheet is proper. They even want to have a vesting schedule of shares that limits the founder from leaving immediately. They just put in the money and even get investment going on. So there are various types of shares. We have ordinary shares, preference shares, redeemable shares. The vesting schedule that I was previously talking about is how shares are earned, even by the partners that you want to incorporate into your business. You might want a partner who's, maybe you're not a technical founder and your partner is a technical founder. You may want to have a vesting schedule that allows you to have a period in which you're going to utilize their talent before they leave. So you don't give them maybe 25% of the entire startup at the onset, but you give them maybe 25% after 5 years. 5 years where you're having 5% of the shareholding vesting every other year. It's very important to have a various cliff of period, so that after a particular period you don't have shares that you have shares vesting in a particular period. It's important to think about your shareholding agreements, and even the ESOPs. The ESOPs are the employee share options plans, and you need to have a shareholder agreement that governs this whole aspect. Now, it's very important to address all of these things as a startup founder, to ensure that you do not lose your company, as soon as you begin it. Now, because I do know that I have talked about so many things, but I know that there are so many questions and so much that we're going to handle. We're going to have these webinars go on for the next couple of weeks to discuss some of these things in depth. But in the interim, what I would like to have is address a few questions for the last 15 minutes that we have in this call. Thank you for your time, and anybody with a question may raise up their hand or alternatively type it up in the chat. Thank you. Great. So, questions. The chat has Florida as a note taker, right? Any questions? Questions about shares, vesting, registration? I think I've talked about way too many things. Taxes, data protection, anti-money laundering. Murima, shall the resources presented be shared? All right. So yes, but we will share the resources in the form of a blog post on our website. UV, brilliant. All right. So okay, I think it's also very important to ask this question. Who here is a startup founder? Maybe you'd raise your hand. Startup founder. Murima, wow, right. Ian, right. Great. Startup founders, Kennedy, I see you. Great. All right. Great, Faith. So now that Anne, nice. Now I'd like to understand what compliance problems would you say that you're very curious about as a startup founder? Murima, maybe. I think that would be. What compliance questions do you find very curious about? All right, so I also tend to think that this being a first session, of course, we've been able to cover so much in so little time, beyond not being able to get into depth with some of the compliance issues that we've discussed. But ultimately, we would want to have an understanding of some of the questions that startup founders have. And within the Google form, I think I had a question that was very critical that I think it's important to address. So there's a question that I asked that was how do I vet a lawyer to match my business's soul? That was Murima's question. How do I vet a lawyer to match my business's soul? So in assessing the lawyer who's important for your business, you need first of all to look at a few things that are important. One being experience. The second thing being the area of expertise in which your lawyer practices in. So you can go and look at their LinkedIn, their websites, and the things that they have written on compare and see what goes on. And I also have seen your other question, IP protection in creating a bulletproof business constitution. Wow. Now, IP protection. So, IP protection is a very interesting thing. We did not cover it in today's presentation, and we're going to address it in next presentation. So, IP protection for businesses. You need to first of all ask yourself, what do I want to protect? Is it my brand? Is it my code base? Is it my code base being a technical business? Is it my copyright? Is it my whatever intellectual property that the various intellectual property that you want to protect? Do you want to license these? What you need to do first of all is do an IP audit. An IP audit is sit down with yourself and ask myself, what assets do I have in my business? This I want to protect. This I want to protect. This I want to protect. Is it my name? Is it my trademark? Is it my logo? Is it my code base? And once you list that asset base, is you ask yourself, how then is my logo protected? Can it be a trademark? Can it be, a trade secret? A logo cannot be a trade secret, but rather within the assets, you ask yourself, how will I protect this? If it's a logo and it's trademark, how then do I register my trademark within this logo? Then in creating a constitution, a bulletproof constitution, write down what you need. Then once you write down what you need and what you need in terms of protecting, then you are able to you're able to engage a lawyer, ask the relevant questions, and how can you protect that? Susan, I see your hand up.
Mine is a contribution. I think you had there was a question on how do you know a lawyer is qualified. You've talked about experience, but I am aware that even somebody needs to be registered with the Law Society of Kenya and also have a practicing certificate. Thank you.
Perfect. I think that's a very, very, very important contribution. So how do you check if your lawyer is qualified? Allow me to project my screen and show you how you're going to look at if your lawyer is qualified. So open your browser, go to Google, then search lsk.or.ke. You're able to this is sorry. Yes, you're able to come at LSK, that's at online.lsk.or.ke, then you're going to search for an advocate. So if you want to search for an advocate, let us search for somebody who is interested. Let us search for Chief Justice Martha Koome and see if she's an advocate. So you're able to see Koome Martha Karambu, PO 10518. She was admitted in 1987 and her practicing status is inactive. This is how you're able to see if your advocate is qualified. So for example, if you also want to search me as an advocate, you just come search Reuben Mburu, then you search and you're going to see her practicing status was inactive. My practicing status is active. My practicing year is 2026 and this is my physical address. So that is how you're going to look at whether your advocate is qualified. What active means is that your advocate can represent you and is well qualified. If an advocate is suspended, they are not permitted to practice. If they are struck off, they are also not permitted to practice. If they're inactive, it is risky for you to have them act as your advocate. If it is unknown, well, usually this occurs especially before once advocates have been admitted, but they have not gotten a practicing license, and if they are deceased, they are dead. I hope that that clarifies and helps you to assess the ability of your advocate to practice. Now, with that, I would like to stop the webinar there. there's so much that we are yet to cover, and so much that we're going to cover within the coming weeks, and so much information that is important for founders and for lawyers out there in order to be able to understand how their businesses should operate. And in case of any questions, do not hesitate to reach out to us. I am typing out my email address in the chat box. Typing out my email address in the chat box for you to ask any questions. And in case you would like to book an appointment with our law firm, you can also do the same there. I will also share my phone number in case of any questions. Will the resources presented be shared? Yes, we're going to have them get uploaded on our website, and our website is reubenassociates.co.ke. Have yourselves a wonderful afternoon. Thank you for joining us.